An inch. A measly inch. Sounds insignificant, doesn't it? Well, for Mrs. Eleanor, the self-proclaimed supreme guardian of our community, that inch of my car over the dividing line between our properties was practically a declaration of war. And you know what's most ridiculous? That's how the biggest battle of my entire retired life began. Who would have thought that at 72, I would become the rebel of Oakwood Estates? There I was on a peaceful Sunday morning, enjoying my chamomile tea while solving crossword puzzles, when I heard knocking at the door. Not normal knocking, mind you. Those furious knocks as if someone was trying to break the door down with their knuckles. I got up, adjusted my robe, because appearance is everything in this community of appearances, and opened the door only to come face to face with Mrs. Eleanor in all her morning glory. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. Is something wrong?" I asked, pretending not to notice that her face was redder than a ripe tomato. "Is something wrong? Is something wrong?" she repeated, as if I had asked the most absurd question in the universe. "You know perfectly well what's wrong. Your automobile is encroaching on my property. I'm here to demand it be removed immediately." I confess I was confused. My car was perfectly parked in my garage. At least, that's where I had left it the night before after coming back from bingo. Mrs. Eleanor, noticing my confusion, grabbed my arm. Yes, grabbed my arm, and practically dragged me outside, still in my pajamas, to show me the crime scene. There was my 1998 sky blue Honda Civic, my faithful companion for over 2 decades, apparently committing the heinous crime of having part of its rear wheel an inch or so over the line that divided our properties. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, or rather what I wasn't seeing, because I had to put on my glasses to even see this crime. "Do you see this? Do you see this?" Mrs. Eleanor practically screamed, pointing at the ground as if there were a corpse there. "Honestly, Mrs. Eleanor, I'm trying to see, but..." That's when she pulled out, and I'm not making this up, a tape measure from the pocket of her impeccably ironed robe. Who, for heaven's sake, keeps a tape measure in their robe pocket at 7 a.m. on a Sunday? Only Mrs. Eleanor. 1.5 inches, she announced, as if she were revealing the code to a nuclear bomb. "Your car is precisely 1.5 inches over my property line. This is a clear violation of Section 8, Paragraph 12, Clause C, of the community bylaws." I took a deep breath, a very deep breath, so deep I probably violated some clause about excessive consumption of community oxygen. "Mrs. Eleanor, with all due respect, it's just 1.5 inches. I promise I'll move the car as soon as I finish my tea." Her stare could have frozen hell. "As soon as you finish your tea? You're prioritizing a herbal infusion over property rights?" I'm shocked, absolutely shocked. At that moment I realized I was dealing with someone who had absolutely no sense of proportion. But as the good retired aerospace engineer that I am, I always preferred diplomacy. After all, I spent 40 years designing systems where a millimeter out of place could mean disaster. I understand the importance of precision, but this was ridiculous. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Eleanor. I'll move the car right now." I went inside, grabbed my keys and moved the car. Not just within the line, I moved it completely into the garage. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The next morning, I found an official envelope from the Homeowners Association in my mailbox. Inside, a fine of $100 for, and I quote, "automotive territorial invasion and deliberate disregard for private property demarcations." Along with it was a photo of my car, with a red arrow pointing to the offending wheel, and a fancy signature from Mrs. Eleanor Rigoto, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. That's when I realized this wasn't about 1 inch. It was about power, and Mrs. Eleanor was determined to wield it over all of us poor mortals who dared breathe the same community air she did. I paid the fine. Of course I paid it. After all, I've always been a model citizen. I've never had a traffic ticket, always filed my taxes correctly, and even returned incorrect change at the grocery store once. But something inside me, something dormant for many years, began to stir. A rebellious streak I hadn't felt since my younger days. The war had just begun, but I didn't know it yet. 3 days after the infamous territorial invasion, I received another morning visit from Mrs. Eleanor. This time the crime was even more heinous. My trash can was visible from the street. "Mrs. Helen, you know this is a violation of Section 4, Paragraph 7 of our bylaws." No container intended, for the storage of household waste shall remain visible from the public. Thoroughfare after 6 p.m. on the day preceding collection, she recited, like a priestess intoning sacred texts. But Mrs. Eleanor, today is trash collection day. I just put the trash can out for the truck that comes at 8 a.m. It's 7:45 a.m., Mrs. Helen, you put your trash can on the street 15 minutes before the allowed time. Rules exist for a reason. And there was another fine, $75 for premature exposure of household waste. Who would have thought I'd one day be fined for prematurely exposing my household waste? My daughter nearly choked on her laughter when I told her on the phone, "Mom, that's harassment. You should report her." But to whom? Mrs. Eleanor was the ultimate authority in the community. She had transformed the homeowners association into her tiny tyrannical kingdom, where her rulebook, a tome thicker than the Bible and far less merciful, was the supreme law. The situation only worsened in the following weeks. I received fines for my mailbox being painted cherry red instead of the colonial red approved by the community. The difference, imperceptible to the average human eye. My air conditioner unit protruding 0.6 inches beyond the facade limit. My orchids on the balcony constituting excessive and unapproved visual pollution. My welcome mat containing the phrase, "Come in and be happy," instead of simply "welcome," thus violating the textual aesthetic cohesion of the community. With each new fine, that rebellious flame inside me grew. I started doing a little research. I discovered, for example, that Mrs. Eleanor fined selectively. Her neighbor across the street, a retired lawyer who occasionally gifted her panettone, at Christmas never received a fine, despite his lawn frequently exceeding the regulated 2 inches. Interesting, isn't it? I also discovered that she had a daughter studying law in the city, and that all her obsession with rules and regulations was, in fact, a clumsy attempt to impress the young woman. "See, daughter, how your mother maintains order and justice." Ironic for someone I caught more than once parking in the handicapped spot at the community center when she thought no one was looking. 4 months of relentless harassment passed. My retirement savings were starting to feel the pinch of the absurd fines. My neighbors, with the exception of a brave few, avoided greeting me, fearing being associated with the trash can rebel, as I came to be known in community social circles. That's when Mrs. Eleanor made her fatal mistake. She called a special meeting of the association to specifically discuss the Helen problem. Yes, my small orchid garden had become a matter of community security. The meeting was to be held the following Saturday at 4 p.m. at the community center. All residents were summoned to debate whether my flowers constituted a threat to the aesthetic and harmonious standard of Oakwood Estates. It was then that I had an epiphany, a crystal clear moment, an idea so perfect, so delightfully rebellious, that it nearly made me cry with joy when it popped into my mind. What Mrs. Eleanor didn't know, what no one in the community knew, was that before I retired, I wasn't just an engineer. I was an aerospace engineer who worked on secret projects for the US Air Force. And more importantly, I had a still, valid pilot's license and a small Robinson R-22 helicopter that I had meticulously restored over the past 3 years. Yes, a helicopter. My retirement project, my hobby, my secret passion, stored in a hangar 18.6 miles away. My little Robinson had never landed in the community because, frankly, it had never occurred to me to do so. But now, I checked the community bylaws, that biblical tome Mrs. Eleanor wielded like a weapon. I read every page, every paragraph, every comma, and as I suspected, there was absolutely no mention of aircraft. Why would there be? What person in their right mind would include prohibition of helicopters in the bylaws of a residential community? The plan was hatched. While everyone was at the meeting discussing my rebellious orchids, I would execute my own aerial revolution. That week, I made all the preparations. I checked the license, inspected the helicopter, meticulously calculated the area needed for landing in my backyard. Being a retired engineer, precision was my forte. My yard was exactly 46 feet by 59 feet, more than enough for the small Robinson, with a comfortable safety margin. On the Saturday of the meeting, I dressed with care, not for the meeting, for what was coming next. Khaki pants, a white shirt, my old Air Force blazer, which miraculously still fit, and even aviator sunglasses. If I was going to cause a stir, I might as well do it in style. I left discreetly in the morning, driving to the hangar. There I prepped the Robinson, did the pre-flight check and took off. The plan was simple: fly over the community. Exactly at 4:30 p.m., when the meeting was at the height of the discussion about my plants, and land gracefully in my yard. The day was perfect for flying. Blue sky, little wind, excellent visibility. As I approached Oakwood Estates, I could see the community center with several cars parked around it. The meeting was in progress, just as planned. I did an initial flyover, just for reconnaissance. From above, the community looked like a perfectly organized chessboard, with its uniform houses and meticulously manicured lawns. Mrs. Eleanor's tiny kingdom in all its ordered glory. It was time. I adjusted course, reduced altitude, and prepared to land. As the helicopter descended, I could see some people coming out of the community center, looking up, pointing. The sound of the blades slicing the air must have interrupted the important discussion about my criminal orchids. I landed, smoothly in the center of my yard, with millimeter precision. I shut down the engines and waited for the blades to come to a complete stop. Through the cockpit window, I could see a small crowd forming around my house. Perplexed faces, open mouths, cell phones pointed my way. I adjusted my sunglasses, opened the cockpit door, and stepped out with all the calm in the world. I waved to the crowd like a queen returning from a diplomatic trip. "Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I haven't interrupted anything important," I said, with a smile that mixed innocence and triumph. The crowd was in shock. My neighbors, the very ones who barely greeted me fearing Mrs. Eleanor's wrath, now looked at me as if I were an alien who had just landed her spaceship. And then, cutting through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, she appeared. Mrs. Eleanor Rigotto, in all her dictatorial splendor. Her face, usually pale as paper, now sported a scarlet tone not found on any approved community color palette. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that likely violated the community's noise regulations. "Oh, Mrs. Eleanor, you're here? What a pleasant coincidence. I was just returning from a stroll." "A stroll? A stroll? You just landed a helicopter in the middle of the community." "Technically, I landed in my yard, which is my private property. This is illegal." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I calmly pulled a plastic folder from my blazer pocket. "Actually, Mrs. Eleanor, I checked with the Federal Aviation Administration. Here is my valid pilot's license, the helicopter's certificate of airworthiness and documentation, proving there are no air traffic restrictions in this area. As for the community bylaws," and here I paused dramatically, "I couldn't find any mention of helicopters or any type of aircraft." I handed her the documents, which she took with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the papers, clearly looking for a loophole, a comma she could use against me. This is absurd. An affront. A perfectly legal landing, Mrs. Eleanor. Unless, of course, you want to argue that my helicopter is an inch over someone's property line. In that case, I'd be happy to adjust it." That's when something unexpected happened. From the back of the crowd, someone started to applaud. Then another, and another. In seconds, a spontaneous ovation broke out. My neighbors weren't horrified. They were amazed. "My goodness, Mrs. Helen, you're a helicopter pilot? What a beautiful machine. Can I take a picture? Do you give rides?" The show of support caught Mrs. Eleanor completely off guard. She looked around in astonishment, as if she couldn't process what was happening. Her tiny kingdom was in open rebellion. "This won't stand," she finally managed to say, before turning around and marching back to her house, stomping so hard she probably violated some noise regulation for residential areas. That same evening, I had more visitors than in the past 5 years combined. Neighbors I barely knew showed up with cakes, bottles of wine, and even flowers to complement my rebellious orchids. Everyone wanted to see the helicopter up close, hear stories from my aerospace engineering career, and most importantly, share their own experiences under Mrs. Eleanor's tyrannical regime. I discovered I wasn't the only victim. Mr. Joseph, a kind 80-year-old gentleman, had been fined because his cat, Yes, his cat occasionally crossed Mrs. Eleanor's yard. Mrs. Martha, a 75-year-old widow, was on the verge of selling her house because she couldn't stand the fines for her garden gnome collection anymore, which, according to Mrs. Eleanor, constituted a disproportionate aggregation of dwarf decorative elements. The stories piled up, each one more absurd than the last. I realized I had inadvertently become the catalyst for a community revolution, and honestly, I was loving every minute of it. The next morning, as expected, we received a visit from 2 inspectors from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Clearly sent after an anonymous complaint, it's not hard to imagine from whom. I showed them all the documentation, they inspected the helicopter and the landing spot, took measurements, made notes. "Everything seems to be in order, Mrs. Helen," said the older inspector, clearly impressed. "In fact, this is one of the best planned residential landings I've ever seen. You clearly know what you're doing." The younger inspector even asked to see the restoration work I did on the Robinson up close. I spent half an hour showing him the technical details, while Mrs. Eleanor watched from her window, probably imagining which section of the penal code she could invoke against me. The counteroffensive came 2 days later, a notice of an extraordinary meeting of the Homeowners Association to discuss and vote on an amendment to the bylaws, explicitly prohibiting the operation of aircraft within community limits. The meeting would be on Friday at 7 p.m. During that week, something extraordinary happened. Without any organization on my part, the residents began to mobilize. Small groups gathered in yards, lively conversations took place in the common areas. For 15 years, since the community's founding, Mrs. Eleanor had ruled with an iron fist, cultivating an atmosphere of fear and snitching. Now, that power structure began to crumble. When Friday arrived, the community center was packed. All 64 homeowners were present, an absolute record for any association meeting. Mrs. Eleanor seemed nervous, something rare for her. Beside her was a well-dressed young woman I recognized as her daughter, the famous law student. The meeting started promptly at 7 p.m. Mrs. Eleanor tried to maintain her usual authoritarian tone, but there was something different in the air. Residents no longer lowered their eyes when she spoke. There wasn't that respectful, almost fearful silence. There was a constant buzz, whispers, even muffled laughter. "We are here to vote on an amendment to our bylaws," she announced, trying to sound firm. As everyone witnessed last Saturday, we had an unprecedented incident that requires an immediate response. "Incident? I thought it was a very well-executed landing," someone shouted from the back, provoking general laughter. Mrs. Eleanor cleared her throat, visibly uncomfortable. "The proposal is simple. Add to Section 12 of the bylaws a paragraph prohibiting the landing, takeoff, or maintenance of any type of aircraft within community limits." Before she could continue, Mr. Anthony, a retired university professor who rarely attended meetings, raised his hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Eleanor. Before we vote on this specific amendment, I'd like to propose a point of order. We need to discuss a complete revision of the bylaws." A murmur of approval swept through the room. "This isn't on the agenda." Mrs. Eleanor began but was interrupted. "According to our own charter, any resident can propose items for a vote if supported by at least 20% of the homeowners," Mr. Anthony continued, "and I have here a petition with 45 signatures requesting a complete revision of our rulebook and a new election for the board of directors." Mrs. Eleanor's face lost all color. Beside her, her daughter looked mortified. The young lawyer was witnessing her mother's empire crumbling in real time. This is a conspiracy, a betrayal. "Actually, Mrs. Eleanor, it's democracy," Mr. Anthony replied calmly. "Something we haven't seen much of around here in recent years." The vote that followed was overwhelming. 58 votes in favor of revising the bylaws and holding new elections, 5 against, and 1 abstention, mine as I felt. It was fair to remain neutral, having been the catalyst for it all. That same evening, a provisional board was elected to conduct the revision process, with Mr. Anthony as interim president. The new board's first decision: annul all pending fines issued by the previous administration. Mrs. Eleanor left the meeting, without saying a word, dragging her daughter with her. Her face was a mask of fury and humiliation. I felt a pang of pity, but quickly remembered the dozens of absurd fines, the constant harassment, the sleepless nights worrying about what imaginary rule I might have violated that time. A week later, a for sale sign appeared in Mrs. Eleanor's yard. But before leaving, she made one last visit. She was alone this time, without her folder of notices, without her tape measure, without her usual arrogance. She seemed smaller somehow. "You destroyed everything I built in this community," she said, without preamble. "That wasn't my intention, Mrs. Eleanor. I just wanted to defend my right to live in peace." Peace? Do you know what peace is? Peace is order. Peace is structure. Peace is clear rules everyone follows. Perhaps, but peace is also mutual respect. It's understanding that not everything needs to be controlled, that sometimes an inch is just an inch. She looked at me for a long moment. "You don't know what you've done. You've just opened the door to chaos. Soon this place will be unrecognizable. Or perhaps it will be more human, Mrs. Eleanor, more alive." She turned around to leave, but stopped at the door. "Just out of curiosity, why a helicopter? Of all the ways you could have challenged me, why this one?" I smiled. "You spent 15 years looking down, measuring inches on the ground. I thought it would be good to make you look up at the sky. There's a lot more space up there." She didn't answer. She simply left and closed the door. It was the last time I saw her. In the following weeks, the Oakwood Estates community underwent a remarkable transformation. The new bylaws, approved by a large majority, were just 5 pages, compared to the previous 87-page version. The rules boiled down to the basics: mutual respect, no excessive noise after 10 p.m., keeping common areas clean, and contributing financially to community maintenance. The low fences that separated yards, the very ones that made measuring inch-by-inch invasions possible, were replaced by living fences, flowering shrubs that blurred the dividing lines instead of emphasizing them. Children started playing in the streets again without fear of violating some obscure rule. Garden gnomes proliferated. Lawns grew beyond the regulated 2 inches. The world didn't end. As for my helicopter, it got a small official helipad in the community's central park. On Sundays, when the weather allows, I offer short scenic flights for my neighbors. The line is always long, especially among the kids. Mrs. Eleanor's house remained for sale for months. Nobody wanted to buy it, not because there was anything wrong with the property, but because the rumor was it was cursed with regulations. Finally, the new board proposed turning it into a community space with a library, game room, and a small cafe. The proposal was approved unanimously. And the most surprising part, Mrs. Eleanor's daughter supported the idea. Away from her mother's influence, the young lawyer proved to be much more reasonable than her mother. She even sought me out to apologize for her mother's behavior and, get this, asked to see the helicopter that caused all the fuss. "My mother was always like this," she confessed during our flight. "Obsessed with control, with dominating every inch around her. I think it's fear, deep down. Fear that if one rule is broken, everything will fall apart." "And what do you think now, seeing the community from up here?" I asked as we flew over Oakwood Estates at 500 feet. She watched the houses for a moment, the yards now more colorful and diverse, people gathering freely in common areas without fear of fines or retaliation. "I think it's more beautiful this way, more real, less like a scale model and more like a place where people actually live." I smiled. It was exactly what I thought. A full year has passed since the original inch incident. The community is unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The old community center, previously used mainly for disciplinary meetings, now hosts yoga classes, book clubs, and even a band formed by retired residents. Yes, I play drums to everyone's surprise. The library in Mrs. Eleanor's old house is a success. Interestingly, the section on technical books about aviation and aerospace engineering, a donation from me, is one of the most popular, especially among the community kids. As for me, I never imagined that at 72, I'd become something of a local celebrity. The helicopter lady, as some kids call me. I confess I like the title much better than the trash can rebel. Last Sunday, we organized the first Community Day at Oakwood Estates. An event open not just to residents but visitors too. There was live music, Yes, our retired residence band performed, homemade dishes prepared by the residents themselves, and of course, scenic flights in my faithful Robinson. During the E-Tarentform event, an elderly lady I didn't recognize approached me. "You're Helen, the one with the helicopter, right?" "Yes, that's me. Do we know each other?" "Not directly. I live in the Belle Arts condos across the avenue. You know, we have an HOA president very similar to your old—" "What did you call her?" "Mrs. Eleanor," I replied, trying not to laugh. "That's it. Well, our Eleanor has been making our lives a living hell for years. Fines for everything, absurd rules, constant surveillance. I came today not just for the party, but to ask for advice." "What kind of advice?" I asked, already guessing where this was going. She leaned in, lowering her voice as if sharing a state secret. "Where can I buy a good used helicopter?" I couldn't help but burst out laughing. "I don't think you need to go quite that far. Sometimes all we need is the courage to say no, to set boundaries, whether they're an inch or not. But the helicopter certainly helped, didn't it?" I winked at her. "It was a dramatic touch I only recommend for extreme cases. But if it comes to that, well, I know a great flight instructor." Watching the community that day, kids running freely, seniors chatting on park benches, lush yards without concern for aesthetic regulations, I realized how far we had come since that Sunday morning when Mrs. Eleanor knocked on my door with her tape measure. An inch. A measly inch triggered a revolution that transformed not just a community, but the lives of dozens of people. A peaceful, good-humored revolution that reminded us that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. As for my old sky blue Honda Civic, the source of all this, it's still there, faithfully parked in my garage, but now occasionally I leave it strategically positioned exactly an inch over the dividing line, now transformed into a beautiful flower bed, as a small monument to the rebellion we all need to cultivate, even at 72. Because ultimately, life is too short to be measured in inches. Unless, of course, you're building a helicopter. In that case, every millimeter matters. Trust me, I'm an engineer. And if there's one lesson I learned on this unexpected journey, it's never, ever underestimate a 72-year-old woman with aerospace, engineering knowledge, and a keen sense of justice. We might seem harmless with our chamomile tea and crossword puzzles, but when provoked, well, let's just say we know how to make an entrance. So the next time someone points a finger at you over a measly inch, remember, sometimes the best response comes from above, way above, and it makes one heck of a noise when it lands in your yard.